Hi, juniors. Today we're going to be talking about what are called logical fallacies. The short definition is flaws in the reasoning of statements or arguments. Sometimes, when one is attempting to be convincing and persuasive, you introduce logical fallacies. A really critical listener or reader can identify these flaws in argument and then call out the offender and hopefully force them to rephrase or provide appropriate evidence. I'd like you to take notes on the 8 logical fallacies, the term and the definition. You don't have to write down the whole example. So 8 terms and 8 definitions in this lesson. Either handwritten or digital notes are fine. When you handwrite, you remember things better. It moves more quickly from your short term to long term. But if you just want to type, that would be acceptable. There are many types of logical fallacies, seriously, dozens and dozens, but we're just going to focus on 8. Here are the names. You don't have to write them yet because they each have their own slide. Your goal is to try to notice these logical fallacies throughout literature, from your peers, on the internet, and especially in anything a politician says or writes. These arguments can often sound convincing, but they're mistakes and they detract from the integrity of one's argument. The first of the 8 logical fallacies we'll talk about is called ad hominem. Sometimes you will see it written in its labeled by its English form, against the man, which is what the Latin phrase ad hominem means. This is when one attacks the character of a person rather than his or her opinions or arguments. An example, Greenpeace's strategies aren't effective because they're all dirty, lazy hippies. In this example, the author doesn't name any particular strategies that Greenpeace has suggested, which the first part of their sentence, set up. If the strategies aren't effective, then talk about the strategies. Instead, the author attacks the characters of the individuals in the group. So they're attacking people instead of ideas. That is a flaw, that is a mistake, and so you could call them out on it and say, well, tell me about the strategies. Thanks to the internet, someone has taken all the dozens of logical fallacies and put this particular referee along with them, so I hope it helps you remember. I went and tracked down the 8 that we needed. So here he says, we have an ad hominem attack. Personal foul attacked the opponent instead of his argument. Number 2 we'll be talking about is ad populum, and that Latin phrase is often translated as bandwagon. In this fallacy, one assumes that something is true or right or good, etc. You defend it because a large group of people says it is true or right or good or worth defending. Example, in a 2000 Gallup poll, they found an estimated 25% of Americans over the age of 18 believe in astrology, or that the position of the stars and planets can affect people's lives. That is roughly 75 million people, therefore there must be some truth to astrology. Okay, a lot of people might believe in something, but that in itself is not any proof of its truthfulness, because 75 million people can be wrong. That's why you must always include evidence. Okay, something being popular does not mean it's right. So our referee says, we have a bandwagon argument. Agreeing with a bunch of people who are wrong makes you just as wrong. Number 3 is known as false dichotomy. That word di means two, so you're splitting it into 2 choices. Therefore, it is sometimes called the either-or fallacy. So the little image there, it's optical illusion. Some people might see faces, some people might see a vase, but maybe there's other options that we're not even thinking of, and people can talk about, 3 or 4 other images that they might see there. So fallacy-wise, it's when a conclusion oversimplifies the argument by reducing it to only 2 sides or 2 choices, either this or that, hence the either-or title, when far more exist. For example, we can either stop using cars or destroy the earth. In this example, the 2 choices are presented as the only 2 options, yet the author ignores an entire range of other choices in between, like developing cleaner technology, developing car sharing systems for necessities and emergencies, or having better community planning that discourages daily driving. Okay, so we don't have to stop using cars. We can improve them or have people use buses and bikes more. So there is an alternate besides just giving up and saying the earth will be destroyed by car pollution. Our referee says, "We have a false dichotomy. Player refuses to acknowledge the existence of alternate viewpoints." Logical fallacy number 4 is called hasty generalization. This is a conclusion based on insufficient or biased evidence. In other words, you are rushing, so rushing, that's like the word hasty, you're speeding, to a conclusion before you have all the relevant facts or a large enough sample size. For example, even though it's only the first day, I can tell this is going to be a boring course. All right, this is too fast of a conclusion. The author is basing his evaluation of an entire course on only the first day, which is often forced to be boring as you have to start with attendance, the syllabus, and other basic housekeeping tasks. To be more reasonable, so to not be flawed in the argument, the author should wait and experience several classes, talk to the professor, and so on, in order to have sufficient evidence on which to base a more sensible conclusion. Our ref says, hasty generalization, there's not enough numbers on the field to represent the whole. That's because it can also come from bad polling data. Like if you ask 5 people something and 4 give you the same answer, you can't apply that to a huge group of people. Like say you met 3 people at Arcadia who were short, and then an average person and a tall person. You can't say, the vast majority of Arcadia High School is short. That's a hasty generalization. Too fast, too skim of a sample size. Number 5, here's another weird Latin term, post hoc, ergo propter hoc. It can be translated to after this, therefore because of this. In this fallacy, it's a conclusion that assumes if A occurred after B, then B must have caused A. So I just realized I wrote my little image backwards there. So the image is showing you if B occurred after A, then A must have caused B. I probably just confused a lot of you way worse. Sorry. It's sometimes known as false cause. Let's look at the example to try to clarify. I drank bottled water and now I am sick, so the water must have made me sick. In this example, the author assumes that if one event chronologically follows another, then the first event must have caused the second. But the illness could have been caused by a bad burrito you ate the night before, a flu bug that has been building up in your body for a few days, or a chemical spill across the school campus. There's no reason, without more evidence, more proof, to assume that it's drinking the water that caused the person to be sick. So just because the sickness occurred after the water, it doesn't mean those two are directly connected. It doesn't mean the water caused the sickness. So our ref calls false causality on the offense, coincidence illegally substituted for proof. You might have heard this phrase as correlation does not equal causation. It's the same concept. Number 6 of 8 is the red herring. This is a diversionary tactic that avoids the key issues, often avoiding opposing arguments rather than addressing them. So diversionary, that means they're trying to distract you. They're trying to change the topic, go on a tangent, and hope that you don't notice that they didn't actually answer your question or provide the evidence that backed up their claim. It comes from a story. It might be true, it might be apocryphal, but it's literally from a red herring. That's a type of fish. And the legend says that puppies were trained for fox hunts, like the British popular horse riding activity of fox hunting. They would train puppies to follow the fox scent, and they would drag red herrings across the trail because the fish smelled so good that a poorly trained puppy would want to follow this, stinky fish smell instead of focus on the fox scent. So an obedient, well-trained, not flawed puppy would stick to the real trail. So that's the same idea here. If you go off on a red herring tangent, you're trying to distract your opponent and you're avoiding giving an actual persuasive argument. So an example here, the level of mercury in seafood may be unsafe, but what will fishers do to support their families? In this example, the author has switched, has diverted, has distracted the discussion away from the safety of food, which is the main point, and is now talking instead about an economic issue, the livelihood, the way people earn their salary when they're the ones catching the fish. While the issues may affect the other, there might be a connection, it doesn't actually address the safety issues. So we shouldn't ignore possible safety issues just because of possible economic consequences. Our ref says, there is a red herring on the field. What the heck does this have to do with anything? Number 7, slippery slope. This is a conclusion based on the premise that if A happens, then eventually, through B, C, and other steps, X, Y, and Z will happen too. They basically equate A and Z, jumping over all the other steps that would have to happen first. If you don't want Z to happen, then they say A must not be allowed to start. So it's a slippery slope because it's a really intense jump. It's a big conclusion. It's making a lot of assumptions to say that if you take that one step of A, you're actually going to fall down this big mountain and end up at Z. For example, if we ban Hummers because they are bad for the environment, then eventually the government will ban all cars. So we should not ban Hummers. In this example, the author is equating banning Hummers with banning all cars. And hopefully you can see that is far too overly dramatic. So they've jumped on this slippery slope logical fallacy that doesn't actually have proof that all those middle steps would happen. Sometimes people get a little bit confused between slippery slope and post hoc ergo propter hoc. So slippery slope is forward thinking. You're looking at something that might happen and then making assumptions on where that will lead. The post hoc ergo propter hoc is looking at the past. It's looking at things that happened and trying to draw connections between them. Our ref says, there is a slippery slope in play. You can't link a second event without a direct cause from the first. All right, you guys are doing great. Here's your 8th and final term and definition to add to your notes. It's called straw man. This move oversimplifies an opponent's viewpoint and then attacks that hollow argument. So you can think of it as they're building a scarecrow, like a straw man, a scarecrow version of the opponent to attack, which is not identical to the actual position of the opponent. For example, people who don't support the proposed state minimum wage increase hate the poor. Here, the author attributes the worst possible motive to an opponent's position. In reality, however, the opposition probably has more complex, sympathetic arguments to support their point. By not addressing the real arguments, the author is not treating the opposition with respect or effectively refuting the opponent's position. Okay, so they are making a fake argument and then trying to battle against that, but you have to focus on what your opponent said in truth. You can't just attack a scarecrow version of what they've said. And again, straw man is about someone's ideas. Don't confuse it with ad hominem, which is about the person, when you attack a person instead of their ideas. Our ref says, illegal use of a straw man argument, attempted deflection of an opponent's argument to a point they weren't defending. Play is no good. All right, that's a lot of information, and you're probably not feeling super confident yet. So let's practice with small groups to become a little bit more familiar with them, get a little bit more practice in. You're going to look at some visuals and try to match it to the logical fallacy term that it seems to be describing. You can find that assignment here. I'll put the link in. And then after you work with your small group on that, you will have a chance to work alone and analyzing some of the logical fallacies that Patrick Henry accidentally introduced into his speech to the Virginia Convention. So you'll have a lot of time to work with your small group and on your individual assignment, but I don't think we will review them until next week so that you can have some time to reread over the definitions, because I know they are tricky. So don't feel bad if you are feeling overwhelmed right now. We will practice.